Ontario, California is a well-known city in the Inland Empire, recognized throughout San Bernardino County for its popular establishments and thriving businesses. Yet beneath its modern streets lies a largely forgotten piece of local history. It began with an Italian immigrant who arrived in the United States with very little money, but would go on to build the world's largest winery. From the vineyards of Cucamonga to a self-sufficient company town that celebrated community and Italian heritage, the winery eventually passed through multiple owners and gradually fell into decline. Over time, the story of Guasti became a forgotten chapter in the history of the Inland Empire. The story begins in Monbaruzzo, a town in Italy's Piedmont region, where a man named Secondo Guasti was born on May 29, 1859. He was raised in a hard-working family involved in food and agriculture. His father, Giovanni Guasti, ran a grocery store and bakery and was also connected to local wine production, while his mother, Magdalena Guasti, raised 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. As a young boy, Secondo worked alongside his father in the family enterprise, where he developed skills in cooking and baking while gaining first-hand knowledge of grape cultivation and winemaking. He attended public school, later studied commercial subjects, and spent much of his free time educating himself through independent study. Stories of America always held the deepest fascination for him, and he collected and read everything he could find about the land across the seas. As a result, he decided to seek his fortune. Secondo left Italy later in life and traveled to Panama, hoping to find work connected to the French Canal project led by engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps. Shortly after arriving, he found himself in the midst of a yellow fever outbreak. The Italian consul advised that Secondo leave for San Francisco, and he departed Panama soon after, continuing on to the United States, arriving in San Francisco on July 3, 1881, during the national turmoil following the assassination of President James A. Garfield. With little money and no connections, Secondo stayed at a small Italian hotel on Montgomery Street. While living there, he told a fellow countryman that he had experience cooking and was willing to help wherever needed. Secondo was told that if he could work well enough as a second cook in Italy, he could easily become a first cook in San Francisco, and the position was immediately given to him. That evening, he reviewed recipes from a small Italian cookbook he had brought with him, preparing himself for the next day's work. By saving carefully, Secondo was able to pursue opportunities beyond wage labor. In 1882, he moved to Guaymas, Mexico, where he joined 2 fellow Italians in opening a restaurant. The business succeeded through long hours and careful management. At the same time, the Santa Fe Railroad was constructing a rail line between Guaymas and Benson, Arizona, and the partners secured a contract to provide meals for railroad workers. When yellow fever spread through the region, Secondo left Guaymas and traveled to Tucson, Arizona, where he became ill and spent 2 months recovering. After regaining his health, he continued west and arrived in Los Angeles on November 3, 1883, with only $3 in his pocket. In Los Angeles, Secondo found work as a cook at Hotel Italia Unita on Olvera Street, owned by Giuseppe Amio, a respected grocer and early pioneer of the city. Once again, Secondo saved his earnings with the intention of building something of his own. He met a woman named Luisa Amio, the daughter of Giuseppe Amio. The two formed a relationship and were married on August 23, 1886. They later had a son, Secondo Guasti Jr. After establishing himself as a successful cook and restaurateur, Secondo returned to his roots, launching a business that drew on his early training and experience. Secondo returned to the wine business, devoting himself entirely to wine production, drawing on the knowledge he had gained from his father while working in the family enterprise. His early operations were based on Aliso Street, where he established his first winery and sourced grapes from nearby vineyards, including land that would later become part of his main property. He worked closely with his wife, who for several years served as his secretary and bookkeeper, managing the office and financial records. In 1897, Secondo expanded his operations, managing the Bernard Winery at 3rd and Alameda Streets. He continued to grow his business renting the Glendale Winery while overseeing his other properties. In 1900, he moved his primary winery to Palmetto Street, a former vineyard site. Secondo not only built successful wineries throughout the Los Angeles area, but also created an organization known as the Italian Vineyard Company, becoming its president and the driving spirit behind its growth. He soon carried that vision east into San Bernardino County. In search of affordable land, Secondo traveled 60 miles east of Los Angeles to Cucamonga, a town once home to the Native American village Cucamonga Bit. Trained in winemaking by his father, Secondo saw potential in the hot, dusty Cucamonga Valley. He believed that deep-rooted grapevines could reach underground water and that sweet wines would thrive in the region's climate. He also discovered a single vine growing in the area, which may have been a straggler from wild or domestic grapevines. To test his theory, Secondo dug 24 feet into the desert sand with a shovel until he struck water. After confirming his discovery, he returned to Los Angeles to secure financing. He began selling shares in his newly formed Italian Vineyard Company to fellow Italian immigrants, raising $16,000 at $100 per share. With these funds, he purchased approximately 1,500 acres of desert land, laying the foundation for the vineyard. The venture proved highly successful. Within a short time, the operation expanded to nearly 6,000 acres under cultivation, eventually accounting for roughly 1/3 of all grape-growing land in San Bernardino County. This site would come to be known as the Guasti Winery. To build the winery and cultivate the surrounding fields, Secondo brought families from his homeland. He also employed Mexican and Japanese immigrants as seasonal agricultural laborers, particularly during the grape harvest, while Italian workers filled most of the permanent winery positions. Additional families from Piedmont were recruited for their winemaking expertise, which proved vital to the operation. In 1904, new winery facilities were constructed at Guasti, including large cellars, fermentation rooms, and a cooperative shop. The project required heavy stone and boulders, which were transported from the nearby foothill communities of Alta Loma and Upland. From this material, the main cellar was built using solid granite. When completed, the structure stretched approximately 450 feet in length. Its walls were nearly 3 feet thick at the base and rose to about 23 feet in height, reflecting the scale of the winery's continued expansion. Secondo went on to establish a largely self-sufficient village, producing barrels on site and constructing a private railroad line to transport the vast quantities of wine produced each year. Over time, this enterprise developed into a thriving company town. Secondo developed his settlement based on a model inspired by the Italian Swiss Colony Winery in Sonoma County, known as Asti. The town of Asti was designed to be family-centered and foster a strong sense of belonging. Workers were provided with steady employment and comfortable housing, creating stability and support for residents. After seeing the success of this model, Secondo began building a similar settlement of his own, applying these same principles to support his workers and their families. Soon after, the town's schoolhouse opened, providing education for children through the 5th grade. As the community continued to expand, public services were established, a post office was built to serve residents, and a firehouse was added shortly thereafter. Homes were constructed near the winery for workers and their families, Workers with spouses and children lived in small houses with gardens, while unmarried men shared communal housing. A mansion stood nearby, serving as one of Secondo's private residences. He later constructed another home on West Adams Boulevard in Los Angeles. By 1911, a boarding house was completed for the workers, built with brick and tile-making machinery imported from Milan. Over the years, a grocery store and bakery opened in 1913. Some women in the town also volunteered to prepare meals for single workers, helping strengthen the sense of community. Festivals and celebrations became the heartbeat of life in Guasti. Harvest parties, picnics, and national anniversaries brought music, dancing, traditional food, and wine. These were primarily used to impress important guests, including shareholders, politicians, and industry leaders, reflecting the lively social life that inspired Secondo's model from Asti. By 1917, it had become the world's largest vineyard, producing 5 million gallons of wine each year. The property stretched as far as the eye could see, with 5,000 acres of grapevines connected by 22 miles of narrow-gauge railroad. For the next few years, the winery thrived, solidifying Secondo's reputation as a pioneering winemaker. When Prohibition struck the United States, it severely disrupted the production of alcoholic beverages nationwide. The Italian Vineyard Company in Guasti adapted under Secondo's foresight. Anticipating legal alternatives during challenging times, he focused on grape growing and shipping, while shifting production to cooking wines, medicinal tonics, wine flavorings for household use, grape concentrate, and government-bonded liquors. Continued demand for altar wines from Catholic churches, which remained permitted under federal law, further sustained the operation. The company also published recipe booklets featuring dishes with Guasti cooking wines and other grape-based products, allowing the winery to continue operating rather than face a complete shutdown. In 1924, the Guasti family brought skilled woodworkers and stonemasons from Mexico and Italy to build a church, later named San Secondo di Asti Catholic Church. The church was named after Saint Secundus, a military officer of Imperial Rome, who was also from Asti in the Piedmont region of Italy. The church was later completed in 1926 and dedicated on October 3 by Bishop John J. Cantwell of Los Angeles. It was built as an exact replica of the 17th century church from Secondo's hometown. The church featured heavy masonry walls, a hand-carved wooden pulpit with detailed craftsmanship, an altar carefully crafted from solid Italian marble, and a wrought iron bell tower housing hand-forged bells imported from Italy. It became the cultural and spiritual heart of the community and a lasting symbol of Secondo's commitment to preserving Italian heritage in America. Unfortunately, all of that came to an end. On August 29, 1927, Secondo Guasti passed away from heart disease. He was laid to rest at Calvary Cemetery in Los Angeles, leaving behind the enduring legacy of the thriving town he had created in the Cucamonga Valley. After the passing of Secondo Guasti, his son eventually stepped into his father's role as president of the Italian Vineyard Company. However, his leadership was cut short in 1933 when he died from a kidney disorder, leaving behind a wife and 2 young children amid the hardships of the Great Depression. A statue was later built in front of the church, along with a small plaque honoring his name. With the children too young to take over, the business was managed by Secondo Sr.'s brother-in-law, Nicola Giuli. Under his leadership, the winery continued to operate independently for several years. In 1935, the Guasti family donated the church to the Diocese of Los Angeles and San Diego. Unfortunately, the situation worsened when both the Guasti school and a barn were destroyed by fire. The passing of Secondo Guasti Jr. not only left the Italian Vineyard Company and the Guasti Winery without its family leadership, but it also set in motion a period of commercial struggle that ultimately led to the property being sold. In 1945, after decades of operation, the Italian Vineyard Company was sold to Garrett and Company, where it operated under the name Virginia Dare Winery. The company assumed control of most of the Guasti vineyards and production facilities, marking a shift toward corporate consolidation in Southern California's wine industry. However, not all of the Guasti property changed hands. Among those who would shape the next chapter of the site's history was a vintner named Philo Bion, whose roots in California winemaking ran deep. Philo Bion's path to Guasti began with his family's long-standing involvement in the industry. He was born on the grounds of the original Brookside Winery in San Timoteo Canyon near Redlands, where his family cultivated vineyards and produced wine. When Prohibition disrupted the industry, his father helped organize a vineyard cooperative that united 11 California wineries under the name Fruit Industries. Through this cooperative, Bion worked as production manager and chief winemaker, gaining practical experience and learning the business from the ground up. In 1952, recognizing the need to adapt to a modern market, Bion left Fruit Industries and revived Brookside at the former Guasti site in the Cucamonga Valley. There, he repurposed the remaining facilities under cooperative control and positioned Brookside in the heart of the region's vineyard and grape shipping center. By introducing retail tasting rooms and focusing on direct-to-consumer sales, he carried Guasti's winemaking legacy into a new era. However, this period of success was short-lived, as both Virginia Dare and Brookside Winery eventually fell into decline, setting off a chain of unfortunate events. The Virginia Dare Winery, operated by Garrett and Company, eventually closed its doors due to legal restrictions, financial instability, and physical destruction. Prohibition abruptly halted wine production, forcing Garrett and Company to rely on alternative products that kept the business alive but weakened its long-term footing. Although operations recovered and expanded, after Prohibition ended, the company began to struggle financially in the following years. Control of the winery passed to leased operators, but these efforts failed to reverse its decline, and the business was ultimately liquidated and sold in the early 1960s. Any realistic chance of reopening ended when a major fire gutted most of the winery's buildings, leaving the site in ruins. Subsequent restoration attempts were abandoned due to structural damage, flooding, and economic challenges, leaving the winery unable to resume operations. In 1972, Philo Bion of Brookside Winery retired and sold the company to Beatrice Foods. In July 1986, Brookside Winery closed for good after years of struggle. The investors from Beatrice Foods who had purchased the winery lacked experience in the wine industry and were unable to reverse falling sales or adapt to changing consumer tastes. With only a handful of employees remaining, Brookside eventually surrendered its lease on the property. The small company town that had once surrounded the vineyard gradually faded away. Over time, the winery itself fell into ruin, and much of the site became unrecognizable, turning it into a ghost town. Some of the old stone buildings were repurposed, while others were left vacant and gradually fell into disrepair. In later years, parts of the former vineyard land came under the control of Ontario International Airport. As the facility expanded, airplanes began descending over what had once been Guasti's grape fields, while new roads and development reshaped the valley that had long been the center of the Cucamonga wine industry. The decaying structures served as filming locations for the 2003 film Seabiscuit, where the houses can be seen in the background. The abandoned vineyard briefly became the site of a Halloween attraction known as the Haunted Vineyard, drawing visitors to the decaying buildings before it eventually closed. The winery's drastic decline over the decades took a heavy toll on the business. However, not all hope was lost as efforts emerged to revive the long-forgotten land. In 2007, San Diego-based developers Oliver McMillan and Steve Carlin purchased the property with plans to transform it into a shopping and entertainment destination called Guasti Plaza. The project aimed to reuse portions of the original winery building to house the Guasti Public Market, along with a new winery tasting room, restaurants, and a bowling alley. The plan also included 400 residential units, 6 office buildings, a historic core, a central retail district, and 2 hotels. Although some buildings were demolished to make way for the development, the project was never completed. Restoring the century-old winery complex proved extremely expensive, with estimates nearing $100 million. The challenges of financing, approvals, and redevelopment eventually stalled the project. Efforts to revive the structure faded, leaving the historic winery largely forgotten. Today, the Guasti Winery continues to lie in ruins, fenced off and patrolled by security guards, though the mansion and remnants of the winery are still visible among the surrounding houses. The post office was moved not too far from the ruins and remains in operation. One of the large wooden storage tanks from the former winery can still be seen at Guasti Regional Park. However, one relic of the Guasti Winery has survived and continues to operate to this day, the San Secondo di Asti Church. Today, the church remains an active parish under the Diocese of San Bernardino, providing regular worship services. The parish offers numerous ministries and outreach efforts such as a food pantry, men's and women's groups, and programs for youth and young adults. Community events, including the annual Guasti Fall Festival, further strengthen fellowship and connection among the approximately 900 families and visitors it serves. They are celebrating the 100th anniversary of their opening in 1926. The church embraces its history, honoring Secondo Guasti with a plaque near the entrance, a lasting reminder of his legacy. From the dream of a single immigrant grew the largest vineyard the world had ever seen, along with a town built on shared work, culture, and community. Though the vineyards are gone, and the winery now stands in silence, the story of Guasti has not completely disappeared. The San Secondo di Asti Church remains the last standing monument of the former vineyard. Hidden beneath modern development, the legacy of Guasti still lingers, a quiet reminder of a remarkable chapter in the history of Ontario, California.